The big race. I was awakened by the sound of a hornbill honking in the banyan tree. I lay in bed looking through the open window as the early morning sunshine crept up the wall. I knew it was a holiday and that there was something important to be done that day. But for some time I couldn't quite remember what it was. Then, as the room got brighter and the hornbill stopped his noise, I remembered. It was the day of the big race. I leapt out of bed, pulled open a dressing table drawer, and brought out a cardboard box punctured with little holes. I opened the lid to see if Maharani was all right. Maharani, my bamboo beetle, was asleep on the core of an apple. I had given her a week's rigorous training for the monsoon beetle race, and she was enjoying a well earned rest before the big event. I did not disturb her. Closing the box, I crept out of the house by the back door. I did not want my parent to see me sneaking off to the municipal park at that early hour. When I reached the gardens, the early morning sun was just beginning to make emeralds of the dewdrops, and the grass was cool and springy to my bare feet. A group of boys had gathered in a corner of the gardens, and among them were Kamal and Anil. Anil's black rhino beetle was the favorite. It was a big beetle with an aggressive forehead, rather like its owners. It was called Black Prince. Kamal's beetle was quite ordinary in size, but it possessed a long pair of whiskers. I suspected it belonged to the cockroach rather than the beetle family, and was called Mucha, which is Hindi for mustache. There were one or two other entries, but none of them looked promising, and interest centered on Black Prince Mucha and my own Maharani, who was still asleep on her apple core. A few bets were being made in coins or marbles, and a prize for the winner was on display, a great stag beetle, quite dangerous to look at, which would enable the winner to start a stable and breed beetles on a large scale. There was some confusion when Kamal's Mucha escaped from his box and took a preliminary canter over the grass. But he was soon caught and returned to his paddock. Mucha appeared to be in good form, and several boys put their marbles on him. The course was about 6 feet long, the track 6 inches wide. The tracks were fenced with strips of cardboard so that the contestants would not move over to each other's path or leave the course altogether. They could only go forwards or backwards. They were held at the starting point by another piece of cardboard, which would be placed behind them as soon as the race began. A little sick boy in a yellow pajama suit was acting as starter, and he kept blowing his whistle for order and attention. Eventually, he gained enough silence in which to announce the rules of the race. The contesting beetles were not allowed to be touched during the race, or blown at from behind, or bribed forward with bits of food. Only moral assistance was allowed in the form of cheering and advice. Mucha and Black Prince were already at the starting point, but Maharani seemed unwilling to leave her apple core, and I had to drag her to the starting post. There was further delay when Mucha got his whiskers entangled in the legs of a rival, but they were soon separated and the beetles placed in a separate lanes. The race was about to start. Kamal sat on his haunches, very quiet and serious, looking from Mucha to the finishing line and back again. I was biting my nails. Anil's bushy eyebrows were bunched together in a scowl. There was a tense hush amongst the spectators. Beep! Went the whistle, and they were off. Or rather, Mucha and Black Prince were off because Maharani was still at the starting post, wondering what had happened to her apple core. Everyone was cheering madly. Anil was jumping about and Kamal was shouting himself hoarse. Mucha was going at a spanking rate. Black Prince really wasn't taking much interest in the proceedings. But at least he was moving, and everything could happen in a race of this nature. I was in a furious temper. All the coaching I had given Maharani appeared to be of no use. She was still looking confused and a little resentful at having been deprived of her apple. Then Mucha suddenly stopped, about 2 feet from the finishing line. He seemed to be having trouble with his whiskers and kept twitching them this way and that. Black Prince was catching up inch by inch, and both Kamal and Anil were hopping about with excitement. Nobody was paying any attention to Maharani, who was looking suspiciously at other beetles in the rear. No doubt she suspected them of having something to do with the disappearance of her apple. I begged her to make an effort. It was with difficulty that I prevented myself from giving her a push, but that would have meant disqualification. As Black Prince drew level with Mucha, he stopped and appeared to be inquiring about his rival's whiskers. Anil and Kamal now became even more frantic in their efforts to encourage their racers, and the cheering on all sides was deafening. Maharani, emerged at having been deprived of her apple core, now decided to make a bid for liberty and rushed forward in great style. I gave a cry of joy, but the others did not notice this new challenge until Maharani had drawn level with her rivals. There was a gasp of surprise from the spectators, and Maharani dashed across the finishing line in record time. Everyone cheered the gallant outsider. Anil and Kamal were very sportingly shook my hand and congratulated me on my methods. Coins and marbles passed from hand to hand. The little sick boy blew his whistle for silence and presented me with the first prize. I examined the new beetle with respect and gently stroked its hard, smooth back. Then, in case Maharani should feel jealous, I put away the prize beetle and returned Maharani to her apple core. I was determined that I would not indulge in any favoritism.